Hello, BookTube. Right, this channel recently reached 6.7 hundred subscribers. And I thought since that was a round number, I had a few zeros, that we would do a Q&A. I called for a Q&A and once again was swamped with questions, and great questions. So we're going through that. I was only up for part 1 yesterday, but I'm going to try and finish all of them today. All the rest of them. There are a large number of questions here, but we're going to try. We're going to try and get through it. So we left off with, I believe, Anthony Suppa. And I was copying and pasting these questions from the Q&A video onto a document on Google Docs for my handheld device here. So there may be a repetition. I'll try and wean that out. So we are up to John Nemzow, who asks, Daniel Defoe or Jonathan Wild? One's an author, one's a book. I don't even know the question. But he also asks, what is your favorite place in Chicago? The train station on the way out. Joseph Coverley says, do you have any high court fantasy novel recommendations? Okay. All right. Well, I cut and pasted that, so that has to be right. I'm assuming that the question means high fantasy recommendations. In which case, yeah, I would have a million of them. I've read a lot of high fantasy. If the question actually does mean high court fantasy novels, well, I would like a high court fantasy novel in which the U.S. Supreme Court isn't single-mindedly and beaverishly dedicated to gutting civil rights. That'd be great. That'd be high court fantasy. But it's not going to happen. So let's see here. Stephen Partridge asks, will you ever consider me as cute as Adam from Memento Mori? Well, cuter. A, because Adam isn't part of BookTube and also seems to be saying that BookTube doesn't exist. And two, because you have a dog. An adorable dog. An absolutely adorable dog that you rescued. So, you can take the laurel leaf. Valentina Garcia says, you said you used to have pen pals. Have you ever tried post-crossing? I haven't. I'm a bit long-winded. And when you were living in other countries, did you notice any difference in the editorial output that you preferred, or that made you miss your own American book publishing industry? I know that in Spanish, for instance, books usually are very nicely made, but with covers that are so ugly. How about India or Italy? Any stories? Do you keep books in other languages? I keep very few books in other languages, but the basic premise of these questions doesn't apply. Because when I was traveling, I had 17 books with me. They never changed except when I had to replace one of them with the exact same book. I never went into bookstores. I never read journals of any kind. I might read the daily paper, but I don't think I looked at book reviews. I was totally outside of that mind frame when I traveled, so I didn't pay any attention to the literary industry of those countries. I guess looking back, maybe that would be interesting if I had, but I didn't do it at all. Let's see here. PHXSNS1 says, do you enjoy oral histories? No, not really. If so, what is your favorite? In recent years, it would be that 2-volume oral history of Star Trek. The first volume of which was the original show, and the second volume was the movies and all of the other shows, all the other incarnations of the show. But even there, oral histories, it's just, I'm reading them impatiently because I'm thinking the whole time, all right, well, how are we going to make a narrative history out of this? How are we going to make a real history out of this? Because half these people, they're being quoted wrong, or they would give a different answer on a different day, or I want context, and I want some degree of 20/20 hindsight. So, and also on a related note, what are your thoughts on Studs Terkel? I have never loved him. I've never liked him as much as his fans do. I don't know if that's me or him. Sooner or later, somebody will reprint all of his work, and those reprints will come to me, and then I will reevaluate. Roberta Dole says, could you recommend any books on Irish history? It's a huge subject. The one that I usually start people off with, if they've never read anything, is Foster's book Modern Ireland, which covers close to 500 years and is very well done. It's very well written, and I'm sure that there's a beautiful UK trade paperback just waiting on Book Depository. But as with anything, as with any sprawling history subject, my real answer would be read an overview, or more than one overview, and then find the specific part that interests you the most, and start really digging in there. I think I'm going to sneeze. The mere mention of the Irish. Anyway, Carlos says, can you share with us 3 moments when you lost faith in humanity? I mean, in your lifetime. For example, for me, one of those moments was when the British people voted yes to leave the EU, and also the war in Syria and the refugee crisis across the Mediterranean. Well, lost faith in humanity sounds like a permanent thing. And for good or ill, I have not lost my faith in humanity. When I meet humans, I'm usually pleased. So humans in the aggregate, especially humans in the aggregate, as the aggregate is portrayed on news programs or in news feeds, is always going to look terrible. Some things that have made me come close are when you feel helpless in your own system. Like, for instance, the Supreme Court case, Citizens United, where politically appointed judges who are supposed to care only about the law and not about their former political parties made it legal to pour unlimited amounts of money, of corporate money, into U.S. elections, making it an absolutely foregone conclusion that those elections could be bought. That is a self-evidently bad ruling. It needs an amendment now to overturn it, but it needs to be overturned. It was a self-evidently bad ruling, and it was based on a self-evidently nonsensical legal premise, which is that corporations are people. Corporations aren't people. You know that when a legal or a philosophical or however ruling is wrong, when the simple statement of the premise reveals that it is wrong. Corporations aren't people. So their ability to pour money into elections should be extremely limited or non-existent. Things like that. Or, for instance, I know that it'll be a gut punch when the United States re-elects Donald Trump. I know that will be a gut punch to my faith in humanity. And I firmly believe that shortly after Donald Trump is re-elected, the strengthened majority in the U.S. Senate will set about the machinery of repealing the amendment that limits a U.S. president to 2 terms. That is widely reported to already be squarely in Donald Trump's sights, to rule forever, to rule until he dies, and then to hand on the presidency to one of his children. I'm sure that my faith in humanity will take a body blow there, but it won't be complete, because the bulk of humanity, no, the people that I meet, the people that I deal with in emails, will still be wonderful. They will still be flexible and interesting. Even that recognized cesspit where you're supposed to go for the worst in humanity, Twitter. I've lost count of the number of times on Twitter where I have started an exchange with someone I don't know and who doesn't know me on the bitterest, most rancorous terms, and ended up either conversing or actually friendly. If it can happen on Twitter and Reddit, then it can happen pretty much anywhere. Those are sites designed to bring out the worst in people. So no, even if that happens, it will mainly be a blow to my faith in the American electoral system, I guess, because Donald Trump won't win the popular vote this time any more than he did last time. Although I've noticed that he has started to say publicly the viciously dangerous lie that millions and millions of people were bussed into New Hampshire in 2016 to lose the state for him. And he says this about every state, that every electoral system anywhere that he lost in 2016, he says he didn't lose. He says that buses and buses of people were brought in to vote illegally. It's going to be tough to see all that vindicated, but it still won't affect the bigger picture. Let's see here. Music Bookaholic says, what are your favorite academic college university presses? I love them all. I've praised them on this channel many times. They have the security to do the kind of publishing that no commercial publisher has. Harvard University Press, Yale, Princeton, Oxford University Press. Those are the 4 big ones in terms of the number of books that I get and the number of books that I have reviewed. I reviewed an enormous number of all 4 of those. But any university press, the work they do is incredible, just incredible. And Music Bookaholic also asks, what are your favorite nonfiction books about the sea? Oh my, how much time do you have? The one I read most recently that I really liked was David Avilafia's gigantic book on the sea. But all histories of the sea, almost all of them, are histories of humans on the sea. A tiny fraction. You couldn't write a history of the sea because history doesn't happen in the sea. Right, as an old friend of mine used to say, any more than history happens on Jupiter. History doesn't happen without humans. Things happen, but not history. So you couldn't write a history. How could you write a history of Jupiter? or for instance, one particular area of the surface of Venus. How could you do it? Plenty of things happen, but but you know what I mean. So I might recommend Abulafia, but there are lots of ones before him. Let's say Vine Ayilvarapu Alavarapu says, any book recommendations on climate change? Just recently, one that I strongly recommend, The Uninhabitable Earth. Don't miss it. It's going to come out in paperback, I think, probably soon. It's probably due to come out in the spring. So we'll probably see it on this channel. But I strongly recommend it. If your library has a copy of The Uninhabitable Earth, get it and read it. you won't be glad you did. It's incredibly depressing, but I believe that the extrapolation cases that a lot of books on climate change have made are extremely conservative, and this book very much is not. It's not alarmist. It's not extremist, but this author looks at all of the changes, all of the data, and says, okay, instead of writing a book about what the world will be like in 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, if the very best case scenario of this data happens, what about if we pick something in the middle? Not the worst case scenario, but something in the middle, something that's more likely to happen, just statistically speaking. What would the world be like then? And the book does that, and it's eye-opening. Steve Watson asks, Virginia Woolf, worth reading? Yeah. Yes, Virginia Woolf is worth reading. Yes. If so, where do I start? I love that. If so, if Virginia Woolf is not safe, who will escape whipping? Where to start depends on what you want. It depends on what you want to do. This is an author who wrote nonfiction brilliantly, short fiction brilliantly, and long fiction brilliantly. So you have to decide what you're in the mood for, and then pick accordingly. I, of course, would say start with the nonfiction, but you might not be interested in nonfiction. And Steve Watson also wants to know, can you recommend a good critical biography of Eisenhower? There have been a couple in the last 10 years. I would recommend Gene Edward Smith's book. A fantastic biographer anyway, but that book on Eisenhower was fairly even-handed. Let's see here. Claude H. says, thoughts on Hart Crane? I haven't been able to resonate with Hart Crane. I feel like that's a lack. I feel like I should. Maybe an 800-page biography would break loose the logjam. And also, what was the first language you learned besides English, and what was the most recent? Well, as I mentioned last time, the first language that I learned before English, and it was my own language, my own native tongue, the tongue of my own people. and there's no use. I mean, it happens all the time, but there's no use not calling it a language. It has moods. It has vocabulary. It has specific meanings. It can be done wrong. It can be done better. And that is the communication between dogs. And you know that it's not universal. You know that it's not just this cookie-cried thing of barks and whines, because if you've been to a dog park, you know some dogs, to use the human way of putting it, some dogs talk with other dogs better than other dogs do. But the most recent, that's a great question. What was the last language that I learned? By learn here, I mean know, so that I can speak it and write it and read it, so that I can just shift into it and it's there like a set of rooms. And I honestly don't know what the most recent one is, whether it's French or Italian, or I don't know what the most recent. It would have been a while ago. Let's see here. Morgana Dulac has a bunch of questions. How are we doing for time? 13 minutes. Okay. I saw recently a Mario de Carvalho book on your channel. How much, probably a lot, do you know about Portuguese books and authors, and how do you like them? On that note, what do you think of the poem Os Lusíadas? I read the Lusíads in the Penguin Classic translation. I have never actually read it in the original, which is terrible. That is absolutely terrible. Because I could tell from the Penguin Classic how much was missing, how much I was missing. What do you think of Portugal when you visited? I absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved it. What a beautiful place. And absolutely full of fascinating ruins, if that's your jam, as the kids say. Do you read in Portuguese, and if yes, what do you think of the language? I can read in Portuguese. I don't, not smoothly and not instantly, and I like it. It's got some Baroque qualities to it that make it really interesting, make it more interesting, for instance, than most Spanish. Let's see here. You probably said on a video and I missed it, but what are your thoughts on Bernard Cornwell books? I like them. I like them just fine. I think he overwrites. It'd be great if we had a Bernard Cornwell novel every other year. Only every other year. I think it would concentrate his books and make them a lot better. Why, for instance, do critics tend to take, for instance, Sansom's Shard Lake novels more seriously than they do Bernard Cornwell? I think the reason for it is because they're buried in Cornwell. And I think they'd take him very seriously, much more seriously if they weren't. But maybe he doesn't care about that. Maybe he cares about financing his pool. And let's see here. The last question is more of a request. Please give Frida a smooch for me. Yes, indeed. Eyes on the prize. Let's see here. John Garganarakis says, what are your 3 favorite cinematic adaptations of Shakespeare plays and why? I think probably cinematic, all 3 would be Kenneth Branagh. His Henry V, his Much Ado About Nothing, and his Love Labour's Lost. I think with one notable, glaring exception, he has an incredible talent for directing Shakespeare, for understanding how to do it. And unfortunately, the huge exception is his Hamlet, which is one of the worst versions of that play that I have ever seen on film or on stage. Just a movie adaptation of Shakespeare that does literally nothing right, of Hamlet that does literally nothing right. Just astonishing. I walked out of it. I went to eagerly, of course. This is a guy who had done Henry V and Much Ado, and I'd loved both of them. I thought they were absolute genius, both of them. I went to his Hamlet thinking, all right, well, here's the big deal. And I walked out thinking, what on earth? What on earth? A first-year drama student wouldn't make those mistakes. So it'd probably be Branagh anyway. Ancient Yakunda says, what do you think of the Witcher books and the Netflix series? This is a horrible omission. I have read only one. I read the first Witcher book, and I kind of sort of liked it. I thought it was kind of sort of interesting, horribly written, but kind of sort of interesting in terms of its milieu, in terms of its mythology and whatnot. And I never got around to the others because the prose just didn't really do it for me. And because I haven't got around to the others, I haven't watched the Netflix series, which is totally wrong. It's totally wrong. I should fix that right away. In fact, I will fix that right away. I will go to the bookstore or the library tomorrow and see if I can get the first 3 Witcher books. That's plenty. I don't need to read every bit of juvenilia from this author. I will read the first 3 Witcher books, and then I will watch a ton of the Netflix show because I shouldn't be letting this go. I know that it's popular, and I know that it's interesting. Oh no. Oh, did we lose our place? That's not supposed to happen on the Star Trek data pad. Let's see here. Oh, there we go. This is fairly easy. All right. Elite Marketing asks, curious what you think about Graham Hancock. Oh my. Just finished reading America Before. Would love to hear your thoughts on his books. I don't know what to make of his books. So obviously, if you've read America Before, you know what I'm talking about. It's this weird kind of speculative prehistory, this kind of weird, vaguely conspiracy theorist. I don't know what to do with I read what was his last one that came out, I think a couple of years ago, Unknown America or something like that. Great big thing. And I read it. I was entertained the whole time, but when I was done with it, I had a very rare reaction for me. I finished the last page and thought, what on earth did I just read? So I don't know what to make of him. I will have to bear down eventually. Sooner or later, an editor is going to ask me to review a book of his, and then I'm going to have to know what I think. Joseph Francis Burton says, can you recommend some good critical biographies of the following victims of countless hagiographies? Gandhi, and for that I'd recommend Ramachandra Guha, his 2-volume Gandhi book. Still hagiographical, but not as bad as Gandhi usually provokes. Marie Curie, I read a Marie Curie biography about 30 years ago or something like that was in French. I don't think it was ever translated into English. If I can get details on it, I will append them down below. But I've heard rumors that Marie Curie is getting a big English language biography soon, maybe even this year. We'll see. Fingers crossed. And also Albert Schweitzer. I have never read a good biographical treatment of Albert Schweitzer. It's too bad. I'm sure they exist. Probably in German, but I haven't read one. Michael Moore says, do you listen to audiobooks, and if so, fiction or nonfiction? I don't listen to audiobooks, no, because, for a number of reasons, but you're here, you've got a chair pulled up, so I might as well. I know that audiobooks are beloved, in the booktube community. I know they are, and I'm not trying to take that away. I'm speaking here for myself. Reason number one would be that audiobooks are dead time. If you're going to listen to it, then you have to just sit there and listen to it. Now, I know a lot of people say, no, I listen to an audiobook while I'm doing other things. And I object to that, especially when those same people then categorize that book as something that they read. You did not read it. If you were driving or cleaning the house or making bouillabaisse, you did not read it if you had it on in the background. That's reason number one, is that in order to listen to an audiobook the way I think you would have to say is the real way to do it, I would have to just sit there and listen to it and not do anything else. And that, no. It's the same reason I don't watch TV. And reason number two is that I tend, audiobooks would be new. It'd be new books that I'd be listening to. And I tend to experience new books specifically as a critic. And that rules out audiobooks because I want to be the one to determine how the words on the page convey what a character sounds like, how they talk, the way they talk, the import, the scenes, the pacing, all of that is determined for you by an audiobook. And I have to assess that. I want to assess that myself. So, and the same thing is true. The third example would be the same thing, which is that what the characters sound like. I have listened to some audiobooks in my time. I listened to, for instance, I've listened to a few of them, but one that sticks out as just an egregious example was David Ogden Stiers, the late David Ogden Stiers, the actor, doing the audiobook for Colleen McCullough's First Man in Rome. And doing voices, including a lisping, simpering voice whenever he was doing a woman or when he was doing Sulla. It was painful, absolutely painful. So I don't listen to audiobooks at all. It's the short answer to the question. I don't at all. Let's see here. The Elizabeth said, what do you think of Richard Lattimore's translations? I think that must mean Richmond Lattimore. And of course, they're not meant to be exciting, right? They're not meant to be particularly readable. Richmond Lattimore does, for instance, his Homer, is famous for his Homer, that does his level best to replicate the rhythm, the line of the ancient Greek, of dactylic hexameter, and it makes for what, in my opinion, is deadly stodgy verse. And I think his Iliad and Odyssey are almost unreadable, and yet they have had snazzy reprints. They are popular in schools. They are certainly popular among classicists who want to teach students who don't have any Greek. Classicists don't want to let go, so they want to teach their kids something as close to what they experienced and love as possible. But the older I get, the longer I'm 28, the more I think that is just not possible, and so you should let it go. So I've read everything, all of the Lattimore translations, but I don't like any of them. I can't fault them. I just personally don't like them. I could never recommend them. Cat's Coffee and Books says, are you married? Have you ever been married? I've been married to Deb many times, but every time I've successfully found a legal loophole to get out of it. Margaret Yo says, when will your memoir be ready for publication? You have read, studied, and traveled widely, and you write, just saying. I have never been so encouraged to write a memoir as I have by BookTube, by people on BookTube who have been urging me for 3 years now, almost 4 years now, to write a memoir. I briefly floated the idea years ago to a group of people who were my core readership at the time. I floated the idea of writing a memoir called Odd Dog, and it was voted down. No one wanted to read it, so I don't know. Maybe it's something that I should consider when I'm a little bit older. Let's see here. Ami 1649, yeah, by odd coincidence, 1649 was one of the years I was married to Deb. It's bad for the whole world. What are your favorite Auden poems? Oh my. We're right back to Hart Crane. Auden, I know that I should know better than I do. I know that I even should like him better than I do. I, of course, love his nonfiction. The big, fat collection of his nonfiction. Don't have it at the moment. God help us. Absolute insane omission for that bookcase that has collections of essays and reviews and prefaces, books about books. To not have that big fat Auden volume is just a crime, an absolute crime, and yet I don't. But his poetry, I should know better than I do. Right now, if I were to answer, it would be all the ones that everybody says. That's how bad I am with Auden, is that I'm only at the beginner level. That's very bad. Uh, Matt Crash says, Steve, are you a fan of Alan Moore's work? If so, which story of his is your personal favorite and why? I am. I am. He's as fruity as a loon. And that makes it a little bit problematic, as the kids say, to be a fan of his work, because it goes off the rails just easily. Like, for instance, his universal masterpiece, what everybody talks about, The Watchmen. I love it. I think it's fantastic. I don't like my superheroes that way, obviously. Obviously. I don't like my superheroes told with any kind of realism. I want them to be gods and have gigantic adventures. I think that's my preferred way of superheroes, which is why it's good for me that the reprint culture in comic book world is so healthy, because there are always reprints of those eras when heroes were like that, before Marvel introduced feet of clay and psychological problems. But even in The Watchmen, even in The Watchmen, which is narratively brilliant, there are still those black frigate things that just go on forever and ever, and intersperse the chapters. When I hand the graphic novel of The Watchmen to somebody who wants to read and doesn't know anything about it, I always tell them, just skip those chapters. Just skip them completely. Because they are a perfect example of the weird, crazy excesses that Alan Moore is capable of. Same thing with From Hell, a graphic novel of his you would think I would absolutely love. It's about Jack the Ripper. And I do absolutely love large parts of it, but there are large parts of it that are just absolutely bonkers, just nuts. Same thing with Jerusalem, his gigantic novel, his prose novel, Jerusalem. On second reading of it, I found a lot of brilliance in it, but a lot of lunacy as well, just a lot of lunacy. So I am a fan of his work, but not an uncritical one, which I guess you probably have seen coming. How are we doing for time? Oh God, we're almost at 30 minutes. We've got a lot more questions. Well, let's just push on. Jan Zero says, "Are you going to play along with Memento Moriathon Bingo?" That's an event that Sean the Book Maniac and Britta Bowler came up with, and a bunch of other people came up with, to honor the aforementioned Adam at Memento Mori, who doesn't make BookTube videos anymore and claims that BookTube doesn't exist, but had a loyal following. So, in answer to the question, I will not be playing along with Memento Mori Bingo. Will you make videos about it? Do you feel slighted because there is no Steve-a-thon bingo? It seems odd that, although you make hundreds more videos, he is still, well, sort of worshipped. I'd just like to hear your thoughts. Well, it's true. He is kind of worshipped, and he emits, he gave off when he was on BookTube, when he didn't forswear it and then claim that that it isn't real, that it doesn't exist. That when I say hello BookTube 5 times a day, I'm talking to myself. When he made his videos, they had a kind of too cool for school, I'm the coolest kid in class and you have always wanted to love me or to be me, and now you get a chance to come that close. And so I was as spellbound by that charisma on camera as anybody else, especially since what a channel that I originally thought for sure would just be Dude Bro turned out to be Adam likes all kinds of things, and a lot of them are really good. So, or liked all kinds of things. I confess it is. I'm not. I don't feel slighted, but it is kind of weird to see the Memento Moriathon and wonder what it would be like to be so loved. I don't think that will ever be me on BookTube. I can't imagine what I would do if it were, but it has been a fascinating thing to see. I am not participating, but one of my favorite things to do has been to look at the comments of those announcement videos for the Memento Moriathon and see all the different echoes of affection for Adam's channel. Let's see. Mimus Ape says, if you could have worked in Silver Age of comics, would you have liked to been a writer or artist? Well, I have no talent as an artist. I know this for a fact because I draw every day. So maybe a writer would be. And how can we save Superman? I assume you mean on the screen? Do you mean on the screen or do you mean in the comics? In the comics, saving Superman, well, actually, in both cases, the answer is very simple. In the comics, saving Superman would be easy. Fire Brian Michael Bendis. And once he's gone, clear him out. Get security to take him to the door right away. Don't let him finish up any projects. But take him out of the building right away. Fire him immediately. And then when you're done with that, fire every subsequent writer who thinks Superman is theirs to do with what they want. And then write a book. There is a book already at DC on Superman. But instead of having it and ignoring it, why don't you put a copy on the desk of every new Superman and Action Comics writer? And that book is Superman has a secret identity of Clark Kent. He has either 2 living parents or 1 living parent, but they are not psychotic, they are not sexy, and they are not both dead. The love of his life is Lois Lane, and she knows his secret identity, and they have a child. And Clark Kent works at the Daily Planet so that he can be in touch with the stories that ground him to his humanity. He's from the doomed planet Krypton, of which there were only a tiny handful of survivors. His childhood dog, his cousin Kara Zor-El, not his father. Not his father. In other words, you write a book on Superman, and you freeze it in place, and you tell every subsequent writer, after Brian Michael Bendis has been taken out, I imagine you have to carry him out, and he'd be screaming the whole time, don't you know who me and my pile of cocaine are? Something like that. Once he's gone, every new writer should be told, if you deviate from this book, that will happen to you. That's how you fix Superman in the comics. Put him back to being iconic and stop being afraid of iconic. And the same thing would be true in the movies, only that in movies it would be try to forget. This is one of many reasons why all of us should try to forget that Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight movies exist. One main reason to forget they exist is because they're so awful. They're so just unremittingly, eye-bleedingly awful. But in addition to that, another main reason you should try to forget they exist is because they don't work. They didn't work for Batman, and he's the only DC character they could even conceivably have worked for. It won't work for all the others. All the rest of DC is bright primary colors. All the rest of DC bursts with humor and hope. And you would think that the powers that be at the DC cinematic universe would realize that that was true by now, because the 2 times that they fielded a superhero movie that was full of color and hope, those movies earned $1 billion. And all the times they haven't done that, the movies didn't. So, actually, I shouldn't say that, because there's now a 3rd DC cinematic universe that has earned $1 billion, and that is Joker, which is not bright and not colorful and not full of hope. Instead, it's an incel's dream come true. But I'm talking about Wonder Woman and Aquaman. And the way you save the cinematic Superman would be to make a movie like that, where Superman is not sexy, where the full color palette is used. There's a fantastic YouTube video. If I remember, I'll link it. There's a fantastic YouTube video that asks, what if Man of Steel were filmed in color? And the person just takes the dead zombie saturation out of that movie and fills it with bright color, and it's a totally different experience. You shouldn't have to do that. You shouldn't have some prank on the internet do that. You should, if a director wants to make Superman someone who gets knifed by a kryptonite dagger in the back after he's been brutally beaten by a bunch of thugs and drowned in a pool of muck and then dropped into the ocean, that director should be fired and call in Ron Howard to fix things. There shouldn't be any such thing as a grim Superman. So that's how you save the cinematic version. What are we doing here? Are we just going to keep going? Oh God, no, we can't just keep going. Because I want to give you a choice. I don't want you to be just stranded in these videos. All right, let's see here. Let's stop with here, and we'll pick up. I'll make another video right now, so you have a chance to get up and stretch. So I'll be back in just a minute.